Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to be talking about the Board Game Geek top 20 games of all time. Just a little bit of a look at those games and analysis of why they're there, what they mean, and who knows what will come out of it. A little bit of a conversation today. Before we get into that, I do have some poll results to discuss. And I asked a poll question on our social media about this topic. I asked our listeners, do you think a board game being in the BoardGameGeek.com top 20 has ever influenced your decision to buy it? The options I gave were definitely, and that got 46%, probably got 33%. I don't think so, got 15%, and definitely not, got 16%. How would you guys answer this question?
I think I know I put something. I think it was the one that was probably influenced. I know I'll go to that list and I'll look, especially when I was new to the hobby, as a reference. I'd be like, well, what are some games I should be interested in? And what are these games like? How do they play? So especially as I was coming into the hobby, I would use that list a lot. And then now since I've been in the hobby, since, seriously being a hobby board gamer since probably 2015, it's fun to see that list evolve and games that didn't exist when I got into the hobby, like penetrate the top 20 and go in and out. So I think it's pretty useful if you're just coming into the hobby or as a reference to see, which games have some staying power, I think is a good indicator. Some of these games have been on the top 20 for a long time, which we'll go into more. So yeah, I think I have used that list to buy games before, at least for a reference and to learn about different games.
My answer was definitely. I have certainly been influenced by the top 20, and maybe not just the top 20. I've been influenced by the standing of a game on BGG, on its overall list. And I think the reason for that is not so much that I look at, what is the number one game? And that I think is going to be the best game. But I think overall, even if you're very skeptical of the ratings themselves, which I am, that I still think that it's a really good kind of yardstick for games of quality, because there's not going to be a low quality game that gets enough votes that it's going to end up in the top 20 or the top 100. So it's a pretty good idea about whether or not a game is of high quality. Funny thing is, tonight, most of my commentary is going to be complaints I have about the top 20 list. So maybe it's ironic that I would actually let it influence me, but it certainly has. Even my wife, who does, is not a hardcore gamer in any way, but she's conversant in games now because of playing with me. If I bring up a game, the first question she'll ask is, where it is on the BGG all-time list? So there you go.
Does it influence Rachel's enjoyment of the game if she knows it's a higher ranked game? Like, does she tend to be, that's a good game, then I think I will like this game too? Like, how do you feel that influences her emotions about it?
I think I guess it sort of means the same thing to her that it means to me. If she hears that this game is number 20 or number 50 or number 100, it means it's probably a game of relatively high quality. If it's way down the list, she's like, what's this crap you're trying to expose me to? So
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. I said definitely, not so much recently. And I think it's just a matter of the fact that I kind of am keeping up with what are the games that are getting talked about a lot. And so well before they ever make it to the top 20 these days, I know a lot about them. I've probably played them. But certainly when I was really getting into the hobby, Board Game Geek was like my go-to place to discover things. Both the hotness is where I was learning about new games that were coming out, but the top 20 list, some key examples, I know that the reason I really got like excited about Scythe and Gaia Project and ultimately bought them both, because I kept seeing them up in the top of the list. They were in the top 10, I think, at the time. And, looked at them. The artwork was cool. The game mechanism seemed cool. So I really dug in. Terraforming Mars, I think I'd heard about it on a podcast before, but having it up there, so high on the BGG top 10 for so long was definitely something that got me excited about it. So I have definitely bought a few games, but it's been a while. And I think that's kind of I think that's likely to happen, right? Once you've been in this hobby for a little while, that list doesn't change a whole lot. So you're going to get to know those. And as something moves on to it, you're probably going to learn about it before it makes the way all the way up there. Here's how some of our listeners answered. Over on our Patreon account, Warren said, I actually just bought Brass Birmingham based purely on the number one ranking. I've watched a bunch of videos and thought it wasn't for me, but I've been wrong many times in the past. No different from when I hear something very positive about a game on your show that I didn't think I'd like based on playthrough videos. Tapestry is the best example, and now it's my number 2 game. So that's great, Warren. Glad you discovered the love for a game that we enjoy a lot as well. And also, remarkable that you care about our opinions. I think that surprises me all the time.
That is remarkable.
Chris on Patreon said, I will almost always pick up a top 100 game when it's on sale. I played about 70% of the current top 100, and my hit ratio is much higher than any random other game purchase. I don't see it as a guaranteed win, but more of a value pick with better potential upside. I think this is a great way to look at it, right? I mean, the games on this list, on the top 100, but certainly in the top 20, a lot of people love it. At least give it a try. Like, that's my take on it, is like, well, with one exception, I want to try all the games, and I'll be mentioned in some of the games that I haven't played on the top 20 yet, but it's a short list. But I think it makes sense. Like, try to get them all played, because there's a good chance that you may fall in love with one of these. Over on Facebook, Aaron said, I may be the only person who thinks that BGG's ranking system is pure perfection. At least for me, as a hardcore hobby gamer, the top games list and the ratings almost always point me in the right direction for my game purchases. And Aaron got some pushback on Facebook from other listeners. And I heard a lot of people say, this is just, it's a popularity contest, whatever. And I think there's a general opinion of that to some extent. It sounds like Chris may have something to say about that tonight. But I agree with Aaron's sentiment and Chris before him, which was that these ratings are a good indicator that there's at least some quality there. And I definitely think that's the case. If enough people love a game, let's at least check it out. It may not be perfect for me. Anyway, we'll get more into that topic in a little bit here. So before we jump into the main topic, I did want to give a shout out. If you like the show, we really appreciate the support we've gotten from our listeners over on patreon.com/boardgamehottakes. And this week we did our monthly board game giveaway. So every month we're giving away a board game to one of our supporters. And this month it was Michael Argenziano. And I gave him a choice of about 10 games to pick from. And he chose Imperium Classic. So I sent that out to him, and he'll have that in his hands before before this episode drops. So thank you, Michael. Thank you to all the rest of you that are supporters. We have a large group. I think we have about 100 people following us and supporting us on Patreon at this point. You're welcome to join and even just join as a free member there, and you can still join in some of the poll questions, and you'll get to hear some news and things like that as it's coming up. But of course, if you enjoy the show, we really appreciate the financial support that helps us keep the show going. I need a new laptop. I need a new computer to do these recordings. I've been struggling. I've been having all kinds of technical issues. So that's coming pretty soon. And partly that'll be because of the support of our Patreon backers. So thank you, everybody. But congrats to Michael. All right. So let's jump into the topic here. And this is, again, is just kind of a conversation, right? It's just, we're going to be talking about the BGG Top 20. The last time we talked about this, we did an episode way back. I didn't get the episode number tonight, but it's back on probably 3 years ago, and it was the BGG Top 10, and we kind of counted down the top 10 and talked about those games and talked a little bit about, what we thought about those games, whether we wanted to play them if we hadn't, but also made some predictions about where the BGG Top 10 might move. So we'll be circling back to that a little bit later. This will be just generally a topic about the top 20 in general and some things that have stood out to us. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so the topic tonight was one I'm kind of interested in. Board Game Geek is kind of the premier database for board games in the hobby. It's where you go if you want to read about any game, almost any game that's been published. If people make a new game, they're going to go try to get it on Board Game Geek and take pictures of it. That's where games go to get noticed and to get into this big, giant database of games. So there's a database, and there's a lot of forums and discussion, and people who care about board games go there. So I think examining the top 20 list is kind of interesting. So we had to pivot to a quick topic tonight. So I was like, hey, let's look at the top 20 and talk about what games should be there, some trends that we might be seeing, any predictions that we might have, any kind of generalities, any abnormalities. And we'll see what kind of topics come out of that. If anything interesting comes out of that, let's hope so. Fingers are crossed. So,
well, before you jump into your first topic, I'm just curious. I made a short list here of the games that I haven't played in the BGG Top 20, just to give people a sense for like what we actually know about these games. And I looked on the list, and there's only 3 that I haven't played at all. That was Twilight Imperium 4th Edition, War of the Rings 2nd Edition, and Brass Lancashire. And I guess officially I haven't played Gloomhaven, but I have played Frosthaven, Jaws of the Lion, and Buttons and Bugs. So I think I've played enough Gloomhaven to feel like I kind of know what that game experience is. How about you guys? How are you doing on the top 20? What do you have left to hit on there?
Well, for me, I have Pandemic Legacy Season 1. I've played regular old Pandemic, but not the Legacy. I played a couple rounds of Gloomhaven, so I don't know if that counts. Not really, I guess.
Sure. It's
And
about
then,
as much as you play of any game that you get, Adam.
right. And then Seven Wonders Duel. I've played like half of that, or played it once at one of the cons. I think you brought it, Tim, or Steve brought it, and we set it up a little bit. And then Twilight Imperium 4. Still haven't played that one. So out of the top 20, I don't know, 2 legit games that I haven't played, I think, and then a couple of half games that I haven't really played. What about you, Chris?
I would have said that my list was longer, but when I actually look at the top 20, it's a pretty short list. The only ones I have not played at all, Gloomhaven, Twilight Imperium 4th Edition, War of the Rings 2nd Edition, Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, Twilight Struggle. I'm not going to count Great Western Trail. I've played the 2nd edition, but I think it's more or less the same game, so I'm not going to count that one.
Yeah.
Seven Wonders Duel. I have played Seven Wonders, but not Duel. And Brass Lancashire.
Yeah. Okay. So it mostly overlaps for us. A few games that none of us have played in a pretty short. I mean, less than 20, or about 25% or less for each of us on that list. So we played most of them. Adam, yeah. So what are you thinking? What kind of brought this top of mind?
Yeah, so I introed it a little bit, and I was just like, hey, let's take a look at the top 20. I think the Board Game Geek is a pretty neat place for board gamers to go. So I wanted to look at some trends and what's coming, what's staying in, what's going to leave, what games we think should be in there, maybe what games we hope get out of there. So I'll kick it off here with if you guys noticed any generalities. So I made a little spreadsheet here. You know me and my spreadsheets. I got one going. I have some nice colors going and a nice auto formatted table. So I was pretty excited about that. But here's some generalities that I got. There's probably an easy way to import. I spent way too much time doing this. Anyway, probably a way better way to do it than I did. But some generalities I discovered during the process of making this spreadsheet. The vast majority of these games, maybe it's not a surprise, are within the last 10 years or published within the last 10 years. There's only 2 that are outside of the last 10 years, and that are Brass. We already embarrassed ourselves enough trying to say this game. Brass Lancashire, stupid Americans. Brass Lancashire.
I'm not even going to try to say it right. No,
right?
I'm not doing it anymore. I'm just going to say it like a stupid American would.
And that was 2007. And then Twilight Struggle was 2005. Well, and then I guess Castle of Burgundy, which I don't know how that game's in the top 20 doesn't make any sense. That was 2011. And then War of the Rings 2nd Edition, which I also haven't played. War of the Rings 2nd Edition was also 2011. So 16 out of the 20 games are from the last 10 years. Maybe that's surprising.
Well, and I would even argue that Brass Lancashire is that's the reprint. So like, I don't think it would have ever been up there if it was the original version of it.
Totally agree.
I think that got a bounce when Roxley reprinted that game.
Well, and I had a question about that because I think this is going to be relevant to some of the things we're talking about. But is that an entirely different game than Brass Birmingham, or is it more or less just a retooling of? Or is Brass Birmingham a retooling of Brass Lancashire?
Yeah, it is a different game in that there are some, like, beer doesn't exist in Lancashire. So it's different enough where there's actually whole new mechanisms, but maybe like the comparison between Dune Imperium and like Dune Imperium Uprising, right?
Yeah,
it's like the general, base of the game is similar enough, but then there are some modifications. From my understanding, I've actually never played Lancashire, as I mentioned, either.
Yeah, there's like ports in there, so you have to, if you care, you got to get your stuff to ports and have it out there and sell your stuff out there instead of the beer. And yeah, couple different mechanisms, but basically, well, the good news, if you know one, you know the other.
I like port too. I like beer more, but port's not bad. Anyway, on that trend line, one of the things that I noticed, because it's kind of relevant to this, that 10 of the top 20 are either reprints, like second editions or whatever, or they're what I would call a franchise game, like Brass Birmingham and Brass Lancashire are kind of the same franchise, and Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion is the same franchise, and Gaia Project is basically Terra Mystica with some evolution to it. And I think that says a lot, and maybe, we'll kind of get ahead of some of Chris's questions or criticism here. And that is that the whole rating system here, it's based on, it's based on user ratings, and that's how these rankings come in, with a little bit of a modification. But generally, anyone who's a BGG user can go on there, they can go to a game page, and they can rate it 1 out of 1 to 10 rating scale. And And that's kind of the base rating. And in fact, you can find the average rating on any of these games. For example, looking at Brass Birmingham, the average rating is an 8.6. But Board Game Geek does have an algorithm that tries to account for a larger number of ratings. So in other words, if a game only has 100 ratings, it's not going to have what they call the geek rating anywhere near that high. So Brass Birmingham, for example, had 46,686 people rank it on Board Game Geek or rate it. And now it's got a geek rating, and what it's actually using is the final rating number here of 8.415. So it's down about 1.5 points or a little more from the original rating, just because it doesn't have enough votes to kind of counter. So I don't exactly know how the algorithm works, but it's some combination of the actual average ratings plus the number of votes. And you can kind of see that. We'll be talking about that a little bit more, about how some games have a higher average rating number than some of these at the top, but they haven't been played or rated by enough people to counter that, that offset. So anyway, my point being on that whole topic is that I did have one, is that I think there's a lot of self-selection bias in this list here, because most of these are reprints. Most of them are games that people already loved, and the people who chose to play the second edition or the next iteration already knew that they liked the game. So you've got a higher likelihood that someone's going to go in and play it, versus if it was a random game on a retail shelf. There's less people that are going to be like, that less of the ratings are coming just from that. A lot of them are coming from the people that already played Brass, the original version, and now they tried Brass Birmingham and said, oh, this is an even better version, so I'm going to rate it higher. So I think there's some of that going on.
Yeah. You say most are reprints. It's about half that are like re-implementation. A disproportionately high number are second editions or re-implementations or some version of a previous iteration. You're right. And it's a disproportionately high number. So that was another one of the trends I was going to mention in here. Chris, any comments on that?
I don't want to. I don't want to let you guys get too far ahead of my comments. I want them to sound original, and that is one of the biggest beefs that I have with the BGG list, especially when you get to the very top, like the top 20. That there are too many games that are essentially the same game that are taking up more than one spot in the list, and I don't think that's right. And a perfect example is what we've just been talking about. You have Brass Birmingham at number 1. And you have Brass Lancashire at number 20. I mean, the top 20 begins and ends with what is very close to, if not the same game. And then even more egregious than that, I think is, now this falls a little bit outside the top 20, or at least part of it does, but number 15 is Great Western Trail. And let's see, where is it? Number 25 is Great Western Trail Second Edition, which, as best I can tell, that one, unlike Brass Birmingham and Brass Lancashire, is essentially the same game. It's just a spruced up production of the same exact game. How can we justify having that take up 2 spots in the top 25 for what's basically the same game?
Yeah, and what tends to happen, if you'll watch this, I think you're going to find the Great Western Trail is going to drop as Second Edition starts to go up there. Just like with Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization, that basically replaced what used to be in about the same spot, which was Through the Ages, A Story of Civilization. So eventually a story fell down. It's still sitting in the top 100 somewhere. But eventually people, I don't know if they rate it low. I don't exactly know why things drop, other than just other things getting rated higher. But I'm not sure if it's lack of activity, if that has anything to do with the ranking system here as well. I get a sense that it might to some extent. So, I think, Chris, that will start to shed a little bit, but I agree. It is really unfortunate, I think, that Board Game Geek never found a way to kind of classify two. I mean, they say re-implemented by or whatever on the page, but they don't keep them as the same entry. And in some of these cases, you couldn't really consider them the same entry. For example, like Pandemic Legacy is not exactly Pandemic. It's a significantly different game. Right. But could you not say that Eclipse Second Dawn for the Galaxy is essentially just Eclipse A New Dawn for the Galaxy, just updated? It would be nice if those were tied in some way so that it was just like one game you're ranking. But, I'm not sure how they fix that, because if the original game had enough flaws that they had to make an updated second edition of it, why should it keep the baggage of the original version in its ranking as well? what do you think is the fix for that, Chris? Do you have a recommendation or a suggestion?
It is a truly unfixable problem. We don't have the technology to fix it. AI has no solutions. I have no solutions. No, I mean, I think that, that is probably the solution, is to link the two games together, sort of like they already do with re-implementation. And whichever is the higher ranked of the two is the one that gets the spot. And then the other one is just listed as a re-implementation of, or vice versa. I think something like that would do fine. Now, that also, the problem with that is that it involves a lot of judgment, because is Brass Birmingham the same game as Brass Lancashire? Is it similar enough that it needs to have the same listing? There are probably people who would argue to the death that they are different games.
Yeah,
and they are right. Yeah, I mean, and there are people that might argue to the death that they're similar enough that they shouldn't be taking up 2 spots on the list. So people are gonna be angry no matter what you do. So I don't blame them for doing it this way. I just see it as a shortcoming in the process, and I'm not sure there's a fix to it.
I wonder though if the original, I have never checked this, but I wonder if the original old school Brass, the old super ugly version of it, if that actually got linked to the Brass Lancashire, if that's still the same listing, because that might have brought that one down a little bit to some extent. I'm not sure if it is though. I think it was just called Brass before, but I'm not positive on that. But yeah, I mean, I get it, Chris, and you know what? It's not going to, even if we did that, it's still not going to fix your Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, because it really is a different game, and it's not going to fix Gaia Project, which is clearly a different game from Terra Mystica, because it's got space instead of fantasy. So and a few other things.
To your point there, Tim, Brass Birmingham actually does say re-implements Brass Lancashire.
Yeah, I mean, it lists it, but it doesn't mean that it's taken over it's not taken over the listings. So.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that is, I mean, is it a problem with the listings? It's just it's a problem in our perception of how valuable these are.
Right.
So, it's a good question. I mean, it's frustrating, I think, especially when you're looking at the top 100 and you want to know what the best 100 games are, and then there's like probably 20 in the top 100 are essentially like just repeats of other games in there. So
I don't know. You guys are being a little harsh. It's just, look at the game, and if you think they're the same game, just ignore it and go to the next one on the list.
Yeah, I get it.
You guys are like going a little nuts here.
No, yeah.
Anyway, okay. My next generality that I found in this list is 17 out of 20 of these games have a weight rating greater than 3.0.
Yeah.
And I think there's also, you could say that about the length, the play time of these games, probably about the same percentage is over an hour to play these games, and probably closer to an hour and a half or more for most of these games. So the people that are voting and ranking these games, they like their games a little bit heavier, whatever that means in terms of Board Game Geek. We have a whole separate discussion about, and then a little bit longer. They like a little bit of investment. They think you need some of this investment, and then they're going to give it that higher ranking. So I thought that was kind of a funky trend also.
Yeah, I spoke to this specific point when I was on Mark Johnson's The Board Games to Go podcast that just released last week. And my thought is on it is that, I mean, it is somewhat, again, self-selection bias, people that are actually going to boardgamegeek.com and like reading the game, there's a little bit of like a heavier game is going to need more investment in going to a website that has, information and instructional details about it and stuff like that. So you're going to just probably spend more time if that's your weight. But I think the weighting, like my own rankings, I can look at it. I've got some games that I absolutely love that I would typically not rank. I have some 10s that are lighter games, but I find myself ranking games that I just got a 2-hour full epic experience out of and loved higher than a game that I got a 10-minute like amazing experience out of. Not because it's not a great game. I'm pretty liberal with rating, so I would typically rate something that I really love no matter what, a 9 or a 10. But I think that's what's happening to some extent, is that it is both the people that are using Board Game Geek, but I think it's also the fact that I just put 2 hours into this game and it was perfect the whole time, and I remembered it and it stuck with me, versus I just played this filler between 2 games and I had a great time with it, but it didn't really stick the same way. So, I think there's probably some element to that. One thing I didn't look into, and I'd be interesting, is like how many of those lighter games are getting the same number of votes? Does a game like,
I have that information for you right here on my spreadsheet.
Great.
Of course he does.
So let's look at Seven Wonders Duel. That's one of the lighter ones. It has a 2.23 weight. That's one of the ones that's, lighter weight. That has 95,000 votes. And to give you some reference, the lowest votes on the list was Eclipse Second Dawn at 13,000 and change. And the highest was Terraforming Mars at almost 100,000 votes. The other light game here, where is it? Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to use my sort function.
I'll tell you why Eclipse Second Dawn has the fewest ratings. Nobody can afford the damn thing.
Well, also it wasn't available for a long time aside from the original Kickstarter backers, so it was a little hard to get. First of all, you guys absolutely should fix that failure of not having played Seven Wonders Duel, because it is fantastic and it belongs on this list. It's my favorite 2-player game and deserves its spot there. So
I think that's insane that it's that light 2.23 on the weight rating, and that's out of 5. For reference, the highest is Through the Ages, a New Story, or a New Story Civilization. That's at 4.44.
Wow.
Yeah, and that one has about 32,000 votes. Pandemic Legacy Season 1 was the next lightest game at 2.83, and then Castles of Burgundy was just under 3.0 at 2.98. And for reference, Pandemic Legacy is a lot of numbers. Sorry, it's boring everybody. About 53, almost 54,000 voters, and then Castles of Burgundy about 60, almost 63,000 voters on those.
Well, I mean, what do you expect? It is so simple and intuitive. I mean, it's just it's such an the rules are so obvious.
It makes so much sense. So easy to follow what's going on there. Thematically perfect, really.
Well, aside from the fact that I think a lot of these games probably did have that self-selection bias because they were re-implementations, one of the other things that I was thinking is that these are maybe not the best games for everybody. Like, I wouldn't look at this list and say these are my top 20. I clearly didn't, right? In fact, we had a listener ask that after our top 40 list, and they said, wouldn't objectively the top 40 games on BGG be the top 40 games of all time? And I was like, well, not for me, they're not. But I think part of this is what we're seeing. I think that there's some truth to this, is that these are the best games in their genres to some extent, right? I mean, not 100%. Everyone's going to have their own feelings about that. But if you like dungeon crawlers, I mean, if you don't like dungeon crawlers, of course, Frosthaven's not going to be your top game of all time. But if you like dungeon crawlers, maybe it is the best dungeon crawler for most people ever made. And maybe it's stretched outside of the boundaries of who normally wants to play dungeon crawlers. It did for me, for example. So I think the same thing could be said of, for example, Arc Nova. Arc Nova is a heavy Euro. It kind of stands. It doesn't really have I couldn't find a specific niche to put it into, but I think it not only was a great Euro game, but also a game that just drew people in due to the theme and kind of what you're doing in the game. Arc Nova is a little bit of an enigma, to be honest. It's kind of surprising that it's gotten that high and stuck that high.
Yeah.
Brass Birmingham though is a great example, right? There's a niche of people that like heavy economic games, and that's what Brass is. It's an economic game. You're just buying and selling stuff, and it just happens to be the best in its genre. And go along with the bias of people who backed it on Kickstarter and felt like they had to justify their expensive purchase and then ranked it higher. There might be some truth to that.
Hold on, Tim. I wouldn't say it's just buying and selling stuff. That's maybe a little simplification of it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another weakness of the list. I mean, and this is a weakness of any rating list, that it's so subjective. And I'm thinking through this, and one of the things I struggled with when thinking through some of the topics about, this list, are movies. I mean, I think that you can look at almost any movie and you can give some kind of a rating based on the craft and the acting and the sound and all the various things. And so it feels very intuitive to me that you could come up with a list of the best movies in a year. For some reason, it feels less intuitive to me for games and more taste-based. And I don't think I have a good reason for thinking that. I mean, I don't think I can justify that with an argument. I mean, I see, Tim, you're shaking your head. I mean, it sounds like you disagree with that point altogether.
I think the way that games are rated and the way that movies are rated are almost exactly the same, because it's a combination of the craft, which is important. And there are different elements of the craft that resonate with people, like, production versus gameplay. But I think there's a magic. There's a little bit of magic in both that stands out for certain movies and games that you can't really recreate if you want to. I mean, people try to do it every year, right? They try to make these Oscar winners, and only a very few succeed. And some of those, even the what are considered the best movies of the year, oftentimes fall off what's the one? Oh, what was that terrible movie with Matt Dillon? I don't remember. Anyway,
Crash?
yeah, Crash. Like what a like
Oh,
that was such a it was such a poorly crafted film and so obvious, and yet it resonated with people that year, so it got it got picked. But I think that happens with games too, where sometimes you can't explain. Like someone can say, I'm going to take all the best mechanisms and the best artist and I'm going to put it into a box, and sometimes you sit down and play a game and it feels like magic. It's just like everything you're doing feels special. It feels like you're having this great moment with every decision you're making. And
yeah.
then another game that seems like it's going to be perfect on paper, it looks perfect, and then you're playing it and you're like kind of bored, or like this just really isn't hitting for me, or like I don't really feel like going back to it. And I don't think that I think it's like movies though. I don't think it's just about the craft. I think sometimes there's this magic that comes in, just the right combination of things go together, and it makes you happy.
Well, props to me for the recall with Crash off.
Thank you. Called it
Matt Dillon.
I wanted to say Traffic for some reason. That was a different.
Nice job.
Yeah. Well, with movies, I think there's something about the way a movie can make you feel, right? That you can't put on paper and you can't craft that. It just has to, either it happens or it doesn't. Same with games. You can't put in the rules how it's going to make you feel interacting with other people, how it feels on the table, if there's something special comes out of it. So yeah, I think there's some magic that comes out of these things. It's more than just paper and chits.
Yeah. Well, I was going to just say that, one other thing that I was thinking about here was some of the games on this list that don't just necessarily top a genre. Games like Ark Nova, which we mentioned, but also Terraforming Mars, for example. Like, what genre is that topping? It's not really. But what I was thinking of is like most of the games that are on here and have stuck are games that were like, they really hit the zeitgeist when they came out. Everybody was talking about them. Everyone was playing it. It's probably some combination of that magic of like, wow, I just played this game and I had a really cool experience with it. But that happens all the time. I mean, Gen Con just ended, and how many like social media posts have you seen people talking about this is the hot new game? And I guarantee you're not going to hear about most of those in 2 months. So it has to be a combination of something hit in that zeitgeist, but then it sticks. And so that, I don't like, again, that's kind of the magic we were talking about. I don't think there's a way to figure out how to guess that, but sometimes it just happens with games. And again, Ark Nova, still a shock to me that it's resonated so well for so many people, because as much as I love that game is a clunky game that has a lot of it has a lot of warts on it, but I'm in the same boat. I still love playing it. It's still one of my favorite games. So it's just interesting how some games can capture that.
Well, let me ask you.
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, let me ask you guys a question that's along the same lines of this conversation. Is it a shortcoming that there's not more of a breakdown by style or mechanism or anything like that? And I guess that could be anything from style in the sense of, like, I'm going to come back to this later, but do co-op games belong on this list along with competitive games? Or Tim, you were talking about economic games versus area control games, war games, that kind of thing. Is that a shortcoming of this list, or do you think that's just going to naturally happen anytime you come up with a list of anything?
I don't think it's a shortcoming at all. And in fact, you can click into Brass Birmingham, and I'm just doing this right now, and you can look at strategy. It's in the category. Its main category is called strategy.
Yeah.
And it's also ranked in the strategy category. So if you want to go and look at, for example, I think there's like a family weight category. You can find games that are ranked higher there, but they could still be in the top games list. And Chris, I think this goes to the point of when we did our top 40 and you kind of said, I'm going to exclude any games that are not a full night, like a full evening. Well, I think it's good to just include everything. When you're talking about a top games of all time, you should be really trying to, and that's what this list should be, which is really looking at the best games regardless of what category they're in. If you want to look at a category, you can dig deeper and you can go into the category that they're in and then see how they rank against other games in that category. There's an option to do that, but this really points you to, even if it's something outside of the genre that you're looking for. Adam, you're shaking your head there like you don't.
I'm not super convinced on that, because there's not that much resolution when you're trying to compare apples to apples or however you want to say it on here, because Gloomhaven, the only subcategories it has are strategy and thematic. So whatever that means, you can't compare it directly with other dungeon crawlers, as far as I know. You can't just be like, show me the best dungeon crawlers. And you can't go to Brass Birmingham and say, show me the best economic games, or show me the best route building games.
Well, you kind of can, because you can go and when you click into the game and over on the right hand side, it's like the classifications, and there's the top one. It's what they call type, so that's where you're seeing the actual ranking. But if you look at like a mechanism, you can pick a mechanism and it'll tell you the top games in that mechanism set. And like you can click under category dungeon crawler and it will tell you the top games in that mechanism set. So if you dig a little bit deeper, you can find some of that information. It's just not quite as like ranked in the same way that the top is.
I did not know that, Tim.
Yeah. I'm a little skeptical of that.
I don't know why you would not want to look at the top games of all time. Like, I don't understand.
But so here's a thing. If you're talking about what are truly the top games of all time, how can number one not be chess or Go? Or the games that have entire cultures built around them that are so culturally significant across the world that they are mythical. They are. I mean, you have. Yeah. Anyway,
first of all, just because something's been around a long time doesn't make it good. So just like we got to rule that whole idea out. I mean, Chris, remember the time we invited one of your friends over to a game night, and he sat down,
yes.
and he was just like poo-pooing the fact that we're playing this strategy game on the table, and he goes, if it's not chess, I don't even want to hear about it. Like, it's just, but the answer to that is that chess players aren't on Board Game Geek, right? And so maybe if there were of course, a serious chess player is gonna be like, it's the best game that's ever been made. 10, right? Magic the Gathering is the same. Like, this is not a Magic the Gathering hobby site, so very few people that play that game rate it on here. So even though it's in here, it's not like the people who are the target audience aren't rating it. So the answer is that. And so this is a ranking by Board Game Geek users. It's not a ranking by the Chess Club, and I would hope, I mean, it would be a pretty useless site if the top 10 games were chess and Monopoly. And because like, what if they just took the total plays of any game and put it in here and then ranked it? Like there's Monopoly right at the top. And we all know that is not a sophisticated and valuable addition to the top games of all time.
Yeah, don't mess with Monopoly.
It wasn't in your top 40 games of all time, man. So.
Not this year.
Yeah. That's a good argument. I mean, that is a good argument that's not the audience for this. So yes, I agree with you, and of course I agree, because I have zero interest in playing chess. I don't find it engaging. It has no theme whatsoever to it, even though I think you argued with me once that it was actually quite thematic. But yeah, fair enough.
All right.
The other generality I found when going through this, and I've used a couple geek lists to do this too. So people will go through and do lots of analysis on, games throughout entire Board Game Geek universe, or just the top 100 or the top 50 or whatever. So there's a geek list called Board Game Geek Climbers that I use. And there's a geek list called Board Game Geek Stats, which is a new one, which is great. And then there's another list called Board Game Geek Top 50 Statistics, which I used all three of those when I was making my list and coming up with some observations. So the one I used here was Board Game Geek Climbers, and there's only 3 games right now in the top 20 that are trending up. The rest are either neutral or trending down, and that's by new rankings by new users, or users that are changing their rankings. So I thought that was super interesting. Jaws of the Lion, which we've been talking about a few times tonight, that one is trending down the most, along with, I think it was Wingspan, which is outside of the top 20. So just interesting to see that a lot of these games in the top 20 are trending down. So the ones that were trending up are Eclipse, Second Dawn, there's only 3. Brass, is that true? Both brasses? Unbelievable. So
it is unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. Brass Birmingham is still trending up, so it's getting even higher. And the distance it's above the next game, it's insane how much people love that game. But yeah, those 3. So Eclipse, Second Dawn, and the 2 brasses, and the rest are either neutral, so in other words, not trending up or down, or trending down, which I thought was nuts.
I thought an interesting thing here, because you were talking about how some of the, in the top 20, some of them are trending down, but there's a few going up. What's still amazing to me is how long some of these games have stuck. For example, I mean, obviously Twilight Struggle is one of the older ones on here, and that is a very niche game. It's a 2-player only GMT war game. And somehow it's still around. But again, that might just be that it's the top of its class. So every war gamer rates that like their favorite game. And so it just ends up really high because of that. But another one that I think is fascinating is Pandemic Legacy Season 1.
Yes.
And I know Chris has a different reason to question this, because I think it was groundbreaking. I think it was taking a game and a formula that people already loved and a lot of people knew, and it gave them this new thing, this legacy thing. And it was kind of the first of its class to do that. So I'm not surprised it was up there for a while, but I am surprised it's sticking around, because there have been a lot of legacy games since then. There have been a lot of pandemic games since then. And one of the reasons I was wondering if this is happening with this game specifically is because it's a legacy game. Everyone played the campaign, they rated it, and then they never go back and are like, oh, I'm not enjoying that game as much anymore, so I changed the rating, right? It's just like, it's done, it's stuck in time. And the majority of those ratings are there and they're never going to change. Like, how many new people are going to go pick up Pandemic Legacy Season 1 at this point? Maybe they're more likely to pick up Season 0 or pick up Great Western Trail Legacy or something else that's comparable. So I think that was an interesting one that may just kind of get stuck there because of the nature of the game that it is.
Although it seemed like if you had a game where that was the scenario, where it wasn't getting new voters, you would think the algorithm would find a way to drop games. Like if it hasn't gotten a vote in 3 years, it's probably not the hottest thing anymore. Probably doesn't need to be at the top of a top 20 list.
Yeah, but this isn't a hot games list either. It is
that's true.
The best games of all time list, and I don't know how much that algorithm adjusts that. But I think it's a great point. I mean, I think it must to some extent, but I'm not sure how much it does. And maybe I've just miscalculated how many people are still playing Pandemic Legacy Season 1. Like maybe that's still growing.
My theory is it hits that right zone for people wanting to do some sort of extended playthrough sort of legacy game. It doesn't have to be necessarily hobbyist gamers, could be just people looking to do something different. Hey, let's try this legacy game where we play a series of games and we change this map and we get to build this kind of thing and save the world. You see people posting pictures of this all the time. Look at this map that I ended up creating and saving the world and conquering this virus. So a lot of people just love it. I think it's a different experience than a lot of people get. And then
I haven't seen people posting pictures of that since 2017. So I don't know where you're seeing all those pictures coming in.
Although, I'm going to make an argument against my own argument here. I mean, my first argument is I can't believe that Pandemic Legacy Season 1 is up there. I mean, my wife and I found that game so unengaging that we didn't even finish the campaign. We just kind of got bored of it and moved on and never finished it. On the other hand, a few weeks ago, I was visiting with my family, and my sister and her husband were kind of expressing an interest in some games. They were the ones that we played Ticket to Ride with. And I said, do you think you guys would ever have any interest in a cooperative game? And they were like, what's a cooperative game? And so I explained it to them. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll send them one and see if they like it. And lo and behold, the first one that came to mind for me was Pandemic Legacy, because it was something that I think somebody would find engaging, even though I didn't personally find it engaging. So I'm not sure where I come out on that one. But I will say this, regardless of how I feel about that, I can't believe it's still sitting at number 2 after all these years.
Yeah. So Adam, I was going to say, maybe we can talk a little bit about our kind of predictions when we looked at this list a few years back.
Yeah, let's do that.
So what were some things that you remember from when we kind of talked about that? Like, what do we think is going to make it to the top 10?
I think you mentioned Ark Nova.
Mm-hmm. Did I in that conversation? I don't remember it. But, okay.
In one of those episodes, you predicted Ark Nova, I think, would climb up there.
We'll call that the BGHT bump.
What's that? Own it, dude. Nice job.
Yeah, it's number 4 now.
Yeah. So nice job there. And then I think we both said Dune Imperium had a chance, or we were thinking it did. And it's done well. It's sitting at number, 5 or
6?
6. Yeah.
6. So it's doing well. I think I mentioned Eclipse. I thought it had a chance. And it's kind of an anomaly as well. I said it had the least amount of votes in any game, and by a lot. It has 13,000 votes, and everything else has at least like 25,000 or more. So it's kind of weird. If it gets more votes, if people get a table, if people can afford it, like Chris was saying, then I think it has a chance to go, top 5, something like that. But
yeah,
it might be one of those slow burns.
I think it could, and I am seeing that people get that to the table more recently because, like I said, there was the original Kickstarter, and of course there was a small group that picked that up. But then it was like years before there was another printing, and now they're even doing it. They just did an expansion recently, so that got kind of got it back to the table for people. And so I think people are actually kind of experiencing Second Dawn for the first time 3 or 4 years after it got published, which is kind of unique for that game. Yeah, I remember talking about that, and it was mainly because at the time the average rating was so high on it, and it was not too far outside of the top 100. And Dune Imperium was kind of similar, and that was really what I looked at mainly, was like, if the average rating on these games that seem to be popular are that much higher than the average rating of the games that are in the top 20, then they seem like they have a really good chance. And in both cases, those proved to be true. Have you looked at any predictions, or what do you think is likely, or what's kind of on your mind that you think might get up there? What do you think has a chance?
So I have a huge list here. I think from 2024, I think Arcs has a good chance. Slay the Spire, although lots of cold early games kind of plateau in like the 40s or 50s, and they don't have that breakthrough wide appeal to get into the top 20 or whatever. Slay the Spire.
Let me just say about Arcs. I was thinking about that too, because right now the average ranking is pretty high. But I think the thing to remember is that everybody that's ranked it got it on Kickstarter. So there's already a little bit of like, I'm already a fan of Cole Worley. Yeah. I'm already a fan of Kyle Farron's artwork. I'm going to go purchase that. We'll see how that hits as it gets out to more people. I'll be really interested if Arcs ends up being more popular than Root. I would be surprised, I think, a little bit if it was, even though I liked it more. But I think it'll probably fall. Its average will probably fall a little bit over time.
Okay. I think Slay the Spire has a good chance, especially with all the people that have played it on the app and the computer. It's getting good reviews from everybody. People that have played the computer game or not, they all seem to love it. I haven't played that one yet. I think that's one that would be interesting to try. Any thoughts on Slay the Spire for you guys?
Well, I played it when it was on the Kickstarter, and I played the tabletop simulator version of it. It's a great implementation of the app, but I have no idea why you would ever play it over the app, because it's just a lot of time and fiddliness to basically reproduce it, except that if you're into co-op games, that seems to be hidden well for people. That's not me, so that's why it's not interesting to me. But it does seem to be really, it's, for me, Slay the Spire is a wonderful little app video game. A game that I played tons and tons of, so I can totally see, especially people that maybe never played it or discovering that magic for the first time. I think it's cool.
Yeah, that one, it's one that I have zero interest in. I actually tried the app based on Tim's recommendation, played it a few times, got bored of it, and moved on. So I can't see why I would go after the slower, fiddlier board game version of it.
And I do think that this, again, is a situation where the only people that have rated it so far are people that got it from Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. And I think that games that come from Kickstarter, there's always, to some extent, half the people have already probably ranked it high because they were just excited about it. And then, that half of the people that ranked it high probably still have it in shrink wrap on their shelves because they haven't even opened it yet. But eventually it'll get to retail, and then it'll really start to level out. So I have more confidence in high early ranking ratings from like, games that went to market that are published games versus Kickstarter games. I think it's a very small chance that those will stick that high.
Along the lines of those re-implementation games, Dune Imperium Uprising, it has its own separate thing. I think that's almost an automatic into the top 20.
That was on my list, and it does have an 8.73 average rating right now, which is higher than Dune Imperium's 8.44. But the problem is it's only got 5,000 votes still. So I think it'll get there eventually, but it's seems to be a slow burn with it. Now, they just announced a new expansion that is for either Uprising or the base game. So that might get more people into Uprising as well.
An interesting one, I think, is Dune War for Arrakis by Simon Games, Come On Games. That one came out, and I was like, another Dune game. I don't even want to take a look at it. But the more I hear about it, the more people are loving it. And it's similar to, I think, War of the Ring, or almost a replacement for War of the Ring. And Dune is kind of the hot thing right now, and people might be picking up this one for a long time to come. So we'll see. And then how many people get their hands on it, how many people actually play it, and if it gets the number of votes. And again, it's another 2024 game, so you look at the top 20, and it usually takes 5, 6, 7 years for those games to get in there. So we'll see in about 7 years from now where that one's at. Age of Innovation.
I was wondering if Tim was going to bring that one up.
Well, it's on my list, and mainly because I was looking through the top 100 right now, and the game that has the highest average rating of anything outside of the top 20 right now is Age of Innovation. Oh no, that's not true. There's one other one, but Age of Innovation is one of them, and it only has 4,145 votes, so it clearly just needs more players. The fact that it's out on Board Game Arena right now, maybe it's still an alpha, I don't remember, but it's, more people are going to get a chance to play it pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the number one game of all time. So for me,
Well, speaking of those high average ratings, I mean, I'm looking at Frosthaven. It's currently sitting at number 27, and it's got an 8.83 average rating. So,
it's
I mean,
get up there.
Yeah, I wonder if it seems like everything related to Gloomhaven kind of makes it up into the top of that list, whether, in my opinion, it deserves it or not.
Well, I mean, in that one, I mean, it climbed, I think it was 5. I saw it climbed 5 spots this week alone. Yeah. So it's not only climbing, but it's climbing fast. And part of this is because the second printing of it got shipped from Kickstarter, and I think people are starting to get it. So it's kind of one of those situations where this one did come from Kickstarter. It had a limited amount of people that could rank it, but now more people are getting it. The thing about Frosthaven and Gloomhaven, though, is that there is so much investment and time in those games that if you like them, you really like them. And so I think that's why those are so, so like the people that are actually playing it, like, what you're getting into. You're getting into 1,000 hours of gameplay or something like that. Yep. If you're going to get into that, then you probably really love that type of game. It's not like you just got invited to your friends, Tuesday night game night, sat down for a game and said, oh, that game is kind of crap, I'm going to rate it low, right? That's just not happening here. So I think that's why, you're right. Frosthaven probably will end up in fact, I think that was one of my other predictions the last time we talked about this. I said that I thought Frosthaven was going to make the top 10, and that was before we'd ever played it or, it had been shipped to anybody.
Another re-implementation, I think Chris already mentioned it, Great Western Trail 2. That's probably going to surpass Great Western Trail. That one will probably drop, and second edition will rise up there. A couple lighter weight ones that I think have a chance that I'd love to see get in there, but they're kind of long shots. Maybe Sky Team, Tim, I think has an outside shot. It's still really new, and it's got the momentum of the Kinderspiel or whatever that award was. So it'd be interesting to watch that one. And then Skyrise, on one of the lists I'm looking at, it has the top rank changes with at least 1,000 ratings. So Skyrise is the top of that little sub list I'm looking at. And I think it's a great game. The production, is a little out of control, but the retail version is easy to get your hands on. And a lot of people are comparing that with like Raw, but a little more interest, a little more things to do than Raw. So that's my dark horse. One of my dark horses to get in there.
Well, I think Sky Team, it's got an 8.19 average rating right now, and it's kind of at the height of its popularity. I think that one's going to fall a little bit, so I don't think it's going to quite make it to the top 20, but I think it will climb a bit more for sure, and it's a great game. It deserves to be up there. Skyrise, we'll have to see once that gets to retail. Do you know what the average rating is on that one yet? I didn't look that one up yet. But
no, let me punch it up while you guys talk about stuff.
The one other thing that I saw on the list here that was surprising to me, but again, it's kind of selection bias. We'll see if it sticks. Oathsworn Into the Deepwood, which is another kind of Frosthaven type of campaign game. It's a boss battler. 8.97 is the average rating on it, which is, I think, higher than anything that's on the top 100 right now. And it's been around for a few years, gotten a couple of Kickstarter versions. I don't know if the second one's been shipped yet, but it still only has 4,877 votes. So I could definitely see, I think that Oathsworn has a potential to get up there. The problem is it's competing with Frosthaven and Gloomhaven for from that audience. So I'm not sure, where those are going to land, but it seems like it's moving up a little bit.
Skyrise is a average rating of 7.9 something.
Okay, so it's definitely low to make to the top 20. But again, what gets out to retail, we'll see. Chris, any predictions from you? Anything that you are just thinking, just you feel in your gut has to get up there?
I have feelings about what ought to be there, and the one that's most obvious to me that belongs in the top 20, and frankly, I'm a little surprised that it hasn't made it to the top 20. It's Barrage. I mean, that's a game we've talked about so much, and it's got all the right elements, right? It's got great theme, it's got great mechanisms, it's got a well-loved design team, it's got great art. I mean, it's got all the things that you want in a great board game. It's got a heavy rule set, which gamers love. So why is that not in the top 20? I mean, right now it's rated at the average rating of 8.16. So, I mean,
it looks like it need another like 20,000 votes and keep that rating for it to get up in the top 20.
Yeah.
So it's it's definitely got some potential, but I don't see how it's going to double the number of votes anytime in the next decade based on the
Well, right.
the popularity of it at this point.
So actually, I had a question. So Brass, I don't remember, and I don't have the data in front of me, but where was Brass sitting before it took that shot up to number one?
It was in the top 100, I think, but I don't remember Brass, like the original Brass. You mean, or do you mean Brass?
No, Brass Birmingham.
Oh, yeah, it was climbing pretty heavily for the first couple of years.
Okay, because I mean it's 2018, it's 6 years old now.
Yeah.
So, but it just recently finally made it up into maybe the number one spot. So, like, what happened there? Like, what was it? Was that just a steady climb, or was there something that pushed that one over the edge and brought it to number one? I mean, what was the story?
I think there was a little bit of that. Was another Kickstarter one where it did pretty well originally, and then you couldn't find it for a little while, and then when it went to retail and just kind of became readily available, then it climbed up there. So that's why I'm saying I think a few of these other Kickstarter ones could make it if they get that kind of retail publication.
Chris, what do you think about Heat Pedal to the Metal? You think that'll claw its way up there?
That's so funny you say that, and that was going to be my second prediction. And I predict it probably won't. I think it's a little bit too light, but it's hot. I mean, it's a hot game, Heat. I think it deserves to be. I think that if you're going to go with a lighter game, so the Barrage is my heavier game that I think ought to make it into the top 20. I think Heat would be a really good, solid contender for top 20. Based on a lot of reasons. I mean, a great thematic game, great integration between theme and mechanisms. It's got fun little toys to play with on the board, and it's light enough that you can teach it to nearly anybody. So, I mean, I think that's a great choice. And what do you think about that one, Adam?
Yeah, that's another dark horse. I think it has a chance to be one of those light games that sneaks in. They're sitting at number 39 right now overall. So it's got 24,000 votes, average of 8.07, so it's got a ways to go. If it gets some more plays, maybe some Board Game Arena plays where people get it and then come over here and rate it. That's where I'm loving it. I can't stop playing this one with you over on Board Game Arena, Chris.
You can't stop beating me too. That's the problem there.
I don't know what happened, man. You were winning all the circuits and stuff, and then I did some driving practice. I watched Will Ferrell drive around, shake and bake, and so I got some pointers to figure out how to do it.
My 7.0 rating on that one isn't helping in any.
Oh, come on, Tim. You're the problem.
Thanks for another, Tim.
I mean, it had a pretty epic rise. It could get higher. I don't think it's going to quite get to the top 20, but I could be wrong about that. I don't know. Another one that's climbing a lot actually is Clank Legacy is still climbing. That it's at
Clank
22.
Legacy is insane. That was okay. So I have some anomalies I was going to talk about. We already talked about a couple. Clank Legacy Acquisitions Incorporated is at number 22. And it's also, check out, here's some other anomalies. It's a game from 2019. There's no games from 2019 in the top 20 for whatever reason. You have funny. Games from the years surrounding.
There's probably a pretty good reason about that. All the games that came out in 2019, nobody was getting together to play in early 2020. So.
They're all shipping in 2020.
Stuff. Yeah.
So Barrage is one of those, Chris. Barrage at number 35. That's a 2019. That could be why. Wingspan is credited as coming out in 2019. That one's dropping significantly. It's at number 29. But Clank Legacy somehow is at number 22. That's a shocker to me. So that was kind of a weirdness. There's no 2019 games in there, but maybe you nailed it, Tim. Maybe that's why. But there's a bunch of 2020 games, so I don't know.
Yeah. In Barrage, I think the thing with Barrage is the same thing. My feeling is about Arcs is why we'll never get that high, is because there's too many bad feelings in that game. Like that game like hurts me sometimes, and Arcs is the same. I think there's so many people that are just not gonna like be willing to play that or put up with.
Does it hurt you more than Cat in the Box? I get hosed like every other round in Cat in the Box.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Painful.
That's funny. Well, I think we hit that pretty well. So any final thoughts before we wrap up on the BGG top 20 topic?
I have a final thought, and I want to make a prediction or a guess at Tim. You said there was one game in the top 20 that you have zero interest in playing, and I wanted to guess, does it have the word Imperium in its name?
It does.
And does it also have the name Twilight in its name?
Well, the funny thing is the three games on the top 20 that I haven't played, I don't really want to play, which is Twilight Imperium, War of the Rings 2nd edition, which I'm probably the most interested of the three, and then Brass Lancashire, because I like Brass Birmingham
Yeah.
fine, but I don't really need to play another version of that game. So, I would play any of these, and I kind of hope to get a play of Twilight Imperium. Maybe can we just do like a half game of Twilight Imperium at some point? Can we just do like the two round version
course.
of it and see how it goes?
We can call it Twilight Imperium.
There you go. Yeah. All right, cool. Well, so before we wrap up today, just one shout out to a listener who left us a nice review over on Apple Podcasts this week. This is Gamer Swede out of Sweden. So this is a Swedish listener here. So welcome. They said, "You can't handle the truth." 5 stars. Wow, these guys don't hold back their punches, and that is very refreshing. In this podcast, you hear arguments why some game isn't that great and what the reviewers didn't like about it. Optimism is great, but it can lead to an everything is great, therefore nothing is great situation. Fun discussions and top-tier synergy between the guys. My favorite 3 grumpy old men on the podcast scene. Can't wait for the next episode.
I'll own that, man. Thank you.
I'm not ready to accept that yet.
That's funny.
I'm not ready yet.
I didn't even think we were that. I feel like we're generally pretty we like games, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't feel like we're that negative on games that often, to be honest. But we are honest. I will own that.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm glad that you're enjoying the show and appreciating it, Gamer Swede, and thank you very much for that.
That's right,
That's
yeah.
awesome. Yeah. All right, cool. Well, that will wrap up this episode. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.